بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الأخوة والأخوات الكرام، أسعد الله مساءكم بكل خير. يسرنا ويسر مركز الإدارة المحلية بجامعة الأمير سلطان بعنوان صناعة الأماكن العامة فيما بعد جائحة كورونا، والتي سوف يقدمها الخبير الدولي إيثان كنت، وسوف يحاوره في هذه المحاضرة سعادة الدكتور عاطف الشهري. وهذه المحاضرة هي محاضرة وباكورة لمجموعة من المحاضرات التي سوف يقدمها المركز في الأسابيع والأشهر القادمة. كما يسرنا في البداية أن يتفضل سعادة الدكتور عاطف الشهري بإدارة هذه الجلسة مشكورا. سعادة الدكتور عاطف الشهري غني عن التعريف، هو مهندس معماري واستشاري وعمراني، تركز أعماله البحثية على التنمية الثقافية والحضرية في المدن في منطقة الشرق الأوسط وشمال أفريقيا، كما أن له خبرات مهنية ومجموعة واسعة من مشاريع التنمية الاستراتيجية والثقافية. فليتفضل سعادة الدكتور عاطف مشكورا.
Hello everyone, and thank you so much for tuning in. Today we are delighted at the Center of Local Governance at Prince Sultan University here in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, to host Ethan Kent, who will address the increasing importance of public space and place, especially after the pandemic, and how we need to use this time for proactive visioning and action. Ethan will also talk about the emerging placemaking networks around the world. Our speaker, Ethan Kent, is the Executive Director of Placemaking X based in New York. And the organization itself, Placemaking X, is a global network of placemaking experts and thought leaders and practitioners. Ethan, thank you so much for your accepting our invitation, and you will have about 40 minutes, to go through your presentation, and then we will have questions and answers from audience, which they could actually send through the chat box on the Twitter account of the center. Ethan, welcome again, and please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Atef, and thank you everyone for being here. Thanks for having me. It's really an honor to get to be part of this conversation, this series. I've long heard great things about the Center for Local Governance. My father's visited with you a couple times, and I followed the Humanizing Cities conference that you all led, which was really a pioneering conference, an important conference, like not just for the region, but globally, an important focus that we hope to keep building on with you all. And then my father also enjoyed working with you in Riyadh, supporting placemaking for your downtown, implementing many of the ideas we're with you all, we're gonna talk about today. So certainly we're at a challenging time in the world, and every community's being faced with, with grave consequences of the pandemic. Personally, locally, and obviously globally, it's affecting the economy, the way we're learning, the way we're all working together. And like any crisis, we need to deal with the most important things first, but we also need to be looking at how these moments, these challenges can teach us, can support us to rebuild back better, to connect differently, to collaborate differently. And a focus on place and placemaking, it can be a means to structure that conversation, to look for short-term opportunities, be resourceful about our recovery efforts, and build new structures to create systemic change that addresses some of the challenges that perhaps we didn't see how we could face before. So in a sense, our public spaces are our connection to place, is the means through which we build resilience, is the means through which people become attached to their community, through which they commit to it, through which they build the social networks, informal and formal, to build back, and the process of coming back into public spaces after lockdowns, after being in isolation, is a process of reinventing our connection to our community, to our world, to our economy, our culture. It's questioning what do we most value, what do we most want to save, what do we not need to keep, and how do we re-enter the world and reintroduce ourselves to our communities. So go ahead to the next slide. So Placemaking X is an organization we just launched actually last February in Abu Dhabi at the World Urban Forum, after having regional launches in the previous several months and with conferences all over the world. And it's really just a network of people passionate about public spaces and placemaking, learning how to do this better together. Placemaking is just an ongoing question of how do we best work together, draw on the different disciplines, the different sectors, different passions and resources to support our public realm, our shared environments. Go ahead. Next slide, thanks. And people are coming to place and placemaking from many different causes, many different focuses. And we're collaborating with leaders, whether locally or globally, that are advancing and trying to reinvent causes from economic development and innovation to equity and inclusion, to health, to governance, as is the really important focus of this center, local food, transportation, sustainability, technology. These are all fields that are getting lots of attention, but aren't achieving their goals within their silo alone. And they're seeing how a focus on place and how their solutions, their skills can support the creation of places can lead to more creative ideas, more creative solutions in a sense, more collaboration between disciplines, and more resourcefulness in how we achieve the solutions and the goals. But more importantly, it actually grounds the solutions in communities, in local culture, in local identity, to make sure it reflects and responds to local needs. It's not imposing solutions on a community, but building the capacity of communities to realize their own vision for themselves, to realize their own goals, and to direct their own future. Go ahead, next slide. So coming back to our own communities and how we're all dealing with the pandemic, everyone's doing it differently. I've been really energized by how New York and especially Brooklyn has been dealing with this, and some of the communities have organized to create open streets to support the local businesses and to support mental health and social health, in allowing people to have space to be out in public, for children to play. And so this reconnecting to our streets, to our communities, to what's local, has been very powerful and inspiring, and helped us see how our streets can be more on a regular basis. Go ahead. Go through these pictures fairly quickly. So people are out walking more. There's art, there's creativity. They're the biking more in New York. There's so there's public uses, but also combined with commercial activities. And people are on their sidewalks more. And so we think, in a way, my father has a new blog called the Social Life Project, where he's saying we need to start recovery with the sidewalks, with letting the inside out, and reconnecting with our neighbors, showing what's going on. Go ahead, go forward, the next slide. And people are living, they're spending time out, they're bringing their chairs out into the streets for public seating. The restaurants, there's over 10,000 streeteries. Go ahead. Where restaurants are actually being allowed to now permanently reclaim the parking spots in front of their businesses. And this is something we've been advocating for decades, and the city just sort of allowed it to happen. And it's not perfect. The idea is you learn from it, and you then have to adjust the regulations to make sure it actually is, addresses public health needs and is safe and actually leads and supports the public realm as well. But for the most part, it really has. Go ahead. But the act of being in the street, of reclaiming public space, of connecting to your community and to each other again, is a powerful act, and an opportunity to reinvent and inform how we shape our public spaces and our streets going forward. This is a business improvement district, Dumbo in Brooklyn, that has temporarily closed several streets to support their local businesses, but also to get people coming back to their community. And what we're seeing is the communities that organize best to reclaim their public spaces, to allow their businesses to use the public realm, are the ones that are attracting people to them. And they're becoming quite lively, and people are traveling a good distance to be in these places for longer and support these businesses. So coming out of the pandemic, the districts, the streets that best organized to collaborate, to be about more than just individual businesses, will be the ones that succeed the most. Will be the ones that effectively become destinations to come to, not through. And we think that we're going to be reinventing our, go ahead to the next image. We need to reinvent our transportation systems around destinations to go to, not through, especially as we move to autonomous vehicles and ride sharing, transportation as a service, where they don't need to park, where there's more drop off and destination. But again, the regions, the districts, the neighborhoods that have destinations to walk, that are pedestrian rich, engaging for walking, biking, and transit, will be the ones that thrive the most. And you're seeing districts around New York that haven't done this, suffering accordingly. Chinatown, of course, should have done this a long time ago. They're natural for this type of more informal use of the streets, but it's really, they knew how to do it very well. Go ahead. And children, how we're supporting children who have perhaps suffered the most and perhaps most unfairly been limited in their lives during the pandemic, how they're being allowed to use streets for play where there aren't as many play areas, and so forth. Go ahead. And then nightlife has perhaps been most evident, as people have wanted to be outside, can't go in restaurants and nightclubs, and there's been musicians, nightlife has become more accessible to people of all classes, people mixing, being around each other with safe distances, again, in the districts where they've supported and allowed and organized to have sort of these open streets programs, and the streeteries, the dining decks that are happening over 10,000 of them around New York right now. Go ahead. So this is Ludlow Street in the Lower East Side. But of course, every part of the world is adapting in innovative ways. We're seeing innovation for reclaiming public spaces. Markets are a big one. How we think cities first formed around markets, around where people came together to be about product, and where they've gone wrong is where they're less like markets, where they hide the people and the products. So the pandemic has allowed and challenged this type of innovation again, where the parts, again, the streets that do the best are the ones that give, the businesses that give back most to the public realm, that are the most aesthetic, the most engaging socially, that are the most responsive to the street, the most open to the street. They're not hiding behind architecture or design anymore. They're much more vulnerable and connected. Go ahead. So, but we're definitely at a juncture, and I'm, both very concerned about the directions of the momentum of urbanization and what the pandemic can cause. It can cause increased isolation, disconnections, the social diseases that are underlying so many of our biggest challenges and divides in the world. But I think if we proactively take these opportunities that the pandemic has offered, this also can be our big opportunity, perhaps our only opportunity to really shift the direction of urbanization, of urban development globally. So right now, if you Google the future of cities, many of the images that come up look like this. And indeed, this has been the image that has perhaps been sort of drummed into our subconscious of what a green or aesthetic or innovative future may look like. Unfortunately, it's just the opposite. This is a frictionless, monoculture, object-oriented future that is where we simply consume the cities, and every city starts to look and act more the same. It's a late-stage innovation, late-stage capitalism. It's sort of acultural. It's anti-human. This is not the humanized city that your conference, spoke about and led on. Go ahead. Unfortunately, this is what is being built by often American architects in the Middle East and China and all around Asia. This is Jakarta, actually, outside of my hotel room, the center of Jakarta. And each of these buildings is about itself, trying to look a little more modern, a little cooler, more of an object than the previous one. But it degrades the street, the public realm, the local economy, the local culture at every step. Go ahead. So, we think if you lead with design and development, you get design and development. It's a narrow goal. Even if you lead for great design and good development, it's not drawing the best out of design or designers or development. Indeed, we've gone through an era sort of copying the Starchitecture model where we just hire the fanciest architect. They can create beauty, create attraction. But again, we're not challenging them enough to also create places. I went here on my honeymoon, 2003. These two people, right after I took this picture, mugged a tourist couple of their camera. I took the picture to illustrate a quote by William White, who was a mentor of my father's and mine. He said that the blank walls proclaim the power of the institution, the inconsequence of the individual for whom they're clearly meant to put down, if not intimidate. And indeed, that's the type of environment that this is the Guggenheim Bilbao by Frank Gehry that got attention for the city, but people in the city say it actually was a distraction from the life that is there, and that could have created a safe environment on this waterfront destination. Go ahead. But certainly each discipline is perpetuating this set of narrow focus, leading with their solutions, and traffic engineers, transportation planning has caused the most damage, but also show how they're the ones that are turning things around the fastest. If you lead with cars and traffic, you get cars and traffic, and you simply you induce more demand. It's the opposite of a virtuous cycle. It's a degrading cycle, sort of a race to the bottom where we drive around more and more and we accomplish less and less. And we degrade the very destinations we're meant to go to. This is in Cuba, faster developing parts of the world are copying this faster, making these mistakes faster. In the US, we're finally starting to look to tear down some of our freeways and reconnect our neighborhoods. Of course, they had the biggest damage in the lower income neighborhoods that they were often cited in. Go ahead. This is New Jersey. Much of America has been defined by cars and traffic. Our time spent in the car is much longer, perpetuating the crises of social isolation, obesity, weak local economies, where we're in low productivity. It's not the car, and planning for the car is not the future of cities, and it can't be. Go ahead. Yeah. Here in New York and on Broadway, we were defined. We led a campaign to shift how New York City was defined around the car, to make it be around places. This is Times Square. Go ahead. So we say it's not about being against the car and traffic, but being for people and places. And we led a campaign called the Streets Renaissance Campaign, to showcase with a lot of the business improvement districts how if you temporarily experiment with how the street space could be reclaimed for short-term, low-cost improvements, just putting out seating. The fancy seating didn't come in this case, and they had to go to the hardware store and buy beach chairs at the right time. And it actually made it more comfortable, more informal. Trying to be too fancy or too aesthetic sometimes makes less comfortable. This created a good conversation. And of course, it led to even the businesses that were all mostly against this being for it, seeing that it actually added life, attracted people, and created comfort. Go ahead. But certainly, this is, there's parts of the world that have less been defined by the car. This is Havana, Cuba. Still have that social life. People still know how to connect with each other, be in public spaces. And I know, my father, Fred Kent, his pictures from Riyadh show that people know how to do this better. They know how to be part of public spaces when they're supported, when they're given those spaces to be in. Go ahead. And this is a project in Nairobi. We're part of a couple placemaking weeks there, and that have been organized locally by different sectors, and included doing temporary activations of streets that led to building the case for and informing how to more permanently remove traffic from the central business district of Nairobi. The city we worked the most in when we were at Project for Public Spaces was Detroit, doing projects with the foundations, with the city government, with the private sector developers, and with activists. This was a temporary beach we put at the center of the city the week that Detroit declared bankruptcy, that helped create the turnaround for the city. And this is, again, we think this is a lighter, quicker, cheaper reinvention of downtowns that we worked on in Riyadh, is a model, especially for coming out of the pandemic, for being resourceful, for experimenting, for creating a learning culture, and creating healthy debate about who uses these spaces, how can they be used, how do we make the process and the spaces more inclusive. But this beach became an icon for that turnaround, particularly because of the informality, the simplicity of it, and the way that it was meant. This created this very small human scale opportunity at the center of the city. And we did similar types of projects around downtown, and then in some of the lowest income neighborhoods as well, adapting to and with those communities. Go ahead. In Mexico City, there's a placemaking foundation that we've worked with to build capacity for placemaking, where there's often actually money for the big capital projects for public space improvement. The politicians really like public spaces there, but there's not a lot of capacity for engaging the community and building the local governance for the public spaces, the place management, the place governance, which I'll talk about later. So the NGOs in this case need to step in to build that capacity and facilitate community visions, action, and ongoing maintenance and management of public spaces. Go ahead. So William White, our mentor, said it's hard to create a space that will not attract people. What is remarkable is how often this has been accomplished. This is Piazza del Campo in Siena, one of the more famous public spaces in the world, and it's very simple what works around it. And it's really it's the increasing informality and comfort that people display and participate in as they get into the center of the space, as they move into it, and people that have, and even tourists that have conform and support that local culture. Go ahead. But in Boston City Hall Plaza, this was designed to copy the form of that space of Piazza del Campo, but hasn't worked for over 40 years. This picture was taken 30 years ago. It still looks the same until just now. They're finally doing a full redesign of it. But we're actually concerned. They've had many small redesign attempts that are still too design-led, not led enough by the uses, the temporary potential, and then the place management and place governance capacity that needs to be built through the placemaking process. Go ahead. So we shape our public spaces thereafter they shape us. We don't realize the extent to which we're shaped by them, how they shape our culture, how we feel about ourselves, each other, our health. But we also don't realize the extent to which our community, our structures of governance are shaping public spaces or not shaping them. This is a picture my father took in Sydney decades ago of how hard it is to cross George Street. And just go ahead to the next one. In the same location, I was just there a little over a year ago, and they've taken cars off of the street, put in light rail, and allowed people to open up the street to people. And so we're at this turning point in cities around the world. This is the center of Auckland, where they're also going to be pedestrianizing the center. And you see affection, connection. This woman, Frith Walker, who's one of the placemaking leaders for Australia, randomly bumps into people as she walks around the streets there, has these serendipitous momentums. So we say placemaking accelerates serendipity, it accelerates innovation, connection, then collaboration that emerges from this type of interaction. But it also connects lovability. It enables lovability. We're seeing a shift from livability as a focus for cities to lovability. And actually lovability can achieve livability more inclusively and more quickly. Go ahead. We'll get back to that too. So how do we achieve lovability though? How do we create great places? And what is the definition of placemaking? Go ahead. So we see the part of the placemaking process is figuring out your own definition for it, and each part of the world defines it slightly differently, and that's healthy. It's an ongoing question of defining it, but it's also just it's a process by which we can shape our public realm in order to maximize the shared value. Ideally, we see placemaking as driving great shared value in an exponential way, and while supporting private value at a more linear way. But it's also an MIT study recently found that the biggest benefit of placemaking isn't the improvement of the place, but the improved social capital, the improved governance capacity that's built through the process of placemaking. So Placemaking X is set up to accelerate the learning and the connection of what placemaking is around the world, because people are leading on it in every corner of the world. And it grew out of a rich history that I want to just give a little bit of background on. Jane Jacobs and William White were, really the sort of where a lot of the roots are for the movement. In the 50s, they started challenging a lot of orthodoxy around top-down planning and looked at ideas around the citizen planner and leading with sidewalks and social life and street life. My father worked with them in the late 60s, and he organized the first Earth Day in 1970 in New York, and then worked on the Street Life Project with William White in the early 70s before founding Project for Public Spaces in 1975, a nonprofit to really put into practice the work of William White and Jane Jacobs. By the late 90s, we had sort of developed various processes that we thought we could start training other people in. And key to the idea of those processes was that not just we weren't the experts, but that the community is the expert. That the way to inform, inspire, challenge communities to act is to respect and enable their expertise. And that's also the way to have bigger capacity to create change. So that if they're not engaged, we're not going to create the change fast enough, and we're not going to create public spaces that serve them well enough. We started seeing placemaking as a potentially global movement in mid 2006 or so, and launched it at a Detroit conference and a Stockholm conference with UN Habitat in 2013. We were working with UN Habitat around that time and before to try to make public space a global cause. And in 2016, the goal was to get it into the New Urban Agenda as a core focus. We got 10 mentions of it in there. Around 2018, the goal of the movement was to have it start to self-organize beyond Project for Public Spaces, beyond us, and it really has. And we've learned so much more than we ever thought possible from leaders around the world defining this, taking it in new directions. And as I'll show you, there's now 15 regional placemaking networks, all growing the placemaking movement for their region, but also leading globally. So recognizing this self-organizing nature of the movement, we launched Placemaking X to focus on highlighting and connecting these leaders, facilitating their further collaboration and supporting them in ways that they identify. Go ahead. So, but core to this movement building was that everyone has the right to live in a great place, and more importantly, everyone has the right to contribute to making the place where they already live great. So it's not just about consuming cities from disciplines, but supporting and challenging everyone to help co-create their environment, to be active citizens. So these are some of the conferences that we helped organize around the world over the last several years that have all defined the global conversation and built the local networks and conversations. And they're all, you can see the reports from all of them on our placemakingx.org website and many other more recent events as well. Go ahead. Placemaking is being used all over the world, even though even in Spanish and some other languages, they're using it as a word, again, because of its sort of amorphous to discuss these ideas. So it's not always being translated, which we think may be for the best sometimes. Go ahead. So some of the regional placemaking networks you can see, and I'll talk about the placemaking for the Arab World Network, the Ammakin network that was launched at the World Urban Forum in Abu Dhabi last year, and what all the great work they're doing. I'll get to that at the end. But all these networks we encourage you to look at and learn from, and look at their website and follow their social media to connect with. And they're all leading in some ways and needing support in others. Go ahead. So the mission of Placemaking X is to be a global network of leaders who together will accelerate placemaking as a way to create healthy, inclusive, and beloved communities. Go ahead. And our vision is to make the spaces we live into places we love, to create a thriving, equitable, and sustainable world through the convergence of values, passion, and action around public spaces. And so each of the networks and the city campaigns are looking to advocate for systemic change, looking to see what are the structural challenges, the obstacles to placemaking, but also opportunities for organizing differently, for creating collaborative models of governance and participation in their communities. Go ahead. They're looking to amplify the stories of each community. Has great stories of placemaking, historic stories, current ones, young people, led people from leadership positions are all doing parts of placemaking. We need to tell their stories and connect them to support them and continue to grow them. Go ahead. And then we need to figure out how to accelerate impact, how to move beyond just lots of short-term projects to showing how place and placemaking can lead to turning upside down our development models, our governance and participation and financing models to enable placemaking and great places, at the scale we need them at. So Cecilia Martinez, who really helped set up Placemaking X and help grow the global movement at UN Habitat and focus on public spaces, says we're shaping a global movement to shape spaces into places. That we need to give purpose and meaning to space. So creating space alone isn't enough. Just open space can be valueless and can actually be problematic if it's not safe and comfortable and welcoming to all, if it's very expensive to maintain. Places are about allowing people to start to feel ownership and responsibility for those spaces, to give them a layering of functions and uses and sacredness even to the communities they're meant to serve. So as I said, we've succeeded in getting public space awareness, and in public space and even placemaking has become somewhat trendy and exciting around the world. But now the challenge is really implementation to address the sustainable development goals, to implement the new urban agenda. There was some good thinking also done around the release of the new urban agenda in something called the Quito Papers by Saskia Sassen, Dr. Close, Ricky Burdett, and Richard Sennett, that talked about a lot of the issues we've been advocating for at Placemaking X, that cities and public spaces need to be incomplete, porous, and complex. So this is a lot of Jane Jacobs' ideas that we don't want to control and order everything. We need to allow the emergent qualities of cities to keep happening. and that public spaces need to have multiple uses, a layering of uses. No one use or user group should dominate a public space. They need to be more flexible, not over-designed, not too expensive often. And we need to respect informality, all kinds of informality, whether it's the informal populations in an economy, or getting the richest people or most formal cultures to be more informal, to be more comfortable, to relax, to smile, to take their shoes off, to sit down. So informality is actually is at core to successful business districts, economic development strategies. If you look at the most loved places on the planet, they're not just consumptive. People are feeling like they're shaping those places and they're really relaxing in them. And places, the great public spaces of Paris or the great markets of the world. Go ahead. So as we talked about, every cause is coming to this focus of place and placemaking, and placemaking X is starting to focus not just on the regional networks, but on a lot of the cross-cutting topics. We're trying to connect the best developers that are leading with place around the world to create a learning network where they can support each other and replicate the models that are working. We're looking at connecting communities that are working on refugees in placemaking, on health and placemaking, children in placemaking, tourism in placemaking. I'll go ahead. I'll get to a couple of these. So how do you do this? And how do you frame this conversation at many scales? The Power of 10 is a framework that can support this conversation. Go ahead. Our theory is that a great city or region in some cases has at least 10 great public destinations. And it's the process through creating these and the management of them that needs to be learned. So in New York, we don't just copy the form. We don't create a High Line or a Bryant Park or a Union Square. What really needs to be learned from these places is the process through which they are created. Often communities were against something and quite negative until they became, and that negative energy actually yielded some focus and some organizing to then be for something. And that's when they became more successful, obviously, was when they had a vision, a collective vision, sometimes informally organized, sometimes through a planning process for the turnaround of these great destinations. Go ahead. But each of these destinations really works at the human scale, at the place scale. We think of the place scale as the scale at which people can make eye contact, is the scale at which people form memories that they can sort of see and feel safe in. And so places like Bryant Park, my father did the master plan for this in 1980 that really focused on the uses and activities, analyzing what was working, not working, and promoting uses and activities. And of course, the management and governance of it has really been a model, a leadership model globally since then, and with always tensions, always making mistakes as they go, but it's at this very human scale that they're very adaptive and always adding new uses. And it's the triangulation, the layering of different uses and how they complement each other that creates the magic, creates the connection, the informality, the fun. So again, no use or user group dominates any of the spaces in the park, but it's very heavily managed and programmed. Go ahead. So we've done this exercise, the Power 10. It's a exercise you can do at any community. We did this in Melbourne and Vancouver, I'll mention quickly, because they're cities that are known for livability. But go ahead. When they did the exercise, the plan directors said, "Oh my God, we planned the fun out of the city." They have created livable places, but not many lovable places. We go a little faster. So the green dots are people's favorite places, yellow opportunity. We can do the same exercise in an informal community in Rio, in the favela. It's not the design of the community that this proves, but how people manage and govern. Again, the focus on local governance at this community district scale is more of a determinant of the success of a public space than the form and the design. Go ahead. We did the exercise in Cali, Colombia. It's very participatory, very engaging to help reveal where people's favorite places are, where they feel safe, where they don't. And then what are the opportunity places that with a little bit of placemaking effort, some experiments, you could really change the perception and the participation in that space and in that community. Go ahead. So our Dutch friends developed this diagram a long time ago when we were doing a lot of training, because they have great design in the Netherlands, but they realized that the tradition, they were still doing engagement, then design, and then hope it gets used. And placemaking is much more iterative. It's building, it's engaging people, trying things, seeing how it gets used, designing things differently. And through that, you build the governance and management capacity. And this is how participation, democracy building at a very local level emerges best. Go ahead. A few quick thoughts on tourism. I don't have too much time to go into this, but tourism is the industry that's perhaps most been disrupted and was most in need of some disruption, perhaps, and we're really excited about how it can be reinvented. So we see place tourism is coming out of this, where people are not going to just consume a place, check off the space that I went there, I don't need to go back, but want to be a participant in a space and even feel like they're a contributor of the space, how they spend their money, their time, how they smile at people, how they slow down in the space and learn about the local culture, whether they're a local or from far away. People want to be and need to be a tourist, and the tourism industry needs to stop selling and perpetuating a cheapened version of cities and start investing in the product of their industry, which is the place owned for and by the local community first. Go ahead. So the best public spaces in the world actually absorb tourists and cause tourists to even behave better, to be part of that community and feel a deeper connection and be less extractive, be less imposing on that community, that culture. Go ahead. So people raise their level of behavior. They're driven to connect deeper with their surroundings, and even to be themselves more. And that's when they go to these places to be themselves, to find themselves, to create memories, to connect deeper with the people they're traveling with, but also to find opportunities. That's the serendipitous, informal opportunities to connect with local people that hopefully benefit them as well. So a placemaking approach to tourism development can not only help ensure economic success, it can manage impact. It can build local capacity for continuing to manage and maintain and evolve a destination. So we want to get the tourism marketing development budgets to invest in the places and learn. They often know a lot about the tourists and have a lot of relationships locally with the destinations. But they can be a catalyst for reinventing our communities around these public destinations defined by local communities through a placemaking process. Go ahead. So it can also preserve a sense of local ownership through maintaining success and authenticities, both for locals and tourists. Go ahead. So I'm gonna one last section. We'll go to the next section. So spaces need to keep re-evolving and reinventing themselves. We can't, a lot of tourism investment was just in preserving the past and the form again, focusing too much on the aesthetics or the design, not on the use and the life that continues to drive relevance, but also builds the case and the viability of preserving the form. So of course, this all leads to place-led governance. And again, the focus of the Center for Local Governance, which is, we're seeing local governance at the city level around the world, really leading us out of this pandemic, and frankly, leading us globally. It's where the best leadership is, and we need to network that leadership, that learning, that change. But we think it's actually at the district level, at the community scale, at the neighborhood scale, where there's the most room for innovation and leadership, and the most need for new models of place-led governance. So we say it takes a place to create a community and a community to create a place. Focusing on places and placemaking builds governance. Building governance enables the capacity to further build places. Go ahead. So, but most governance today is in silos, just like we talked about the different disciplines and departments or sectors. But as we just mentioned, tourism is operating out of their own office building and their own measurements and their own solutions. So same with safety and security, planning, transit, economic development. We all have our own goals, their own budgets, their own ways of managing things. Go ahead. So placemaking, place management is starting to facilitate drawing on each of their skills, interviewing them, trying to engage their resources and solutions for placemaking. and that's a step. But where we actually need to get going towards is place-led. So not just not just how those departments apply their solutions in a place-sensitive way. We go to the next one. But where they're all serving place-led governance, where their goal is to build the capacity of communities to address their own issues, to address their own safety, economic development, build their tourism destinations in a sustainable way. So this is a trajectory that we're seeing district-led, place-led governance moving towards, and different parts of the world are leading on this from different sectors. Sometimes it's the businesses that are moving in this way towards business improvement districts. In Australia, it's more government-led that's moving to devolving government to the districts. Sometimes it's NGOs, foundations that are building the capacity. And each of those has areas to learn from, but we need to keep going further. Go ahead. Next slide, thanks. So we're moving from place to be the broader conversation.
Ethan,
should we take questions now? Okay, thank you. Yeah.
Ethan, I hate to interrupt, but
no worries.
You've got like a couple of minutes to wrap up.
Okay.
We have many questions. Everybody wants to talk to you.
Oh, good. Well, okay. Questions are better. So should I just quickly show? Let me go through these really quickly because I wanted to quickly introduce the Ammakin Placemaking Network. Go ahead.
Okay.
And I'll do 2 minutes. This is the Power of 10 is also a model for scaling placemaking impact globally, but you can skip through this. Just click many times. We want to be exemplary in what the best place-led projects are. And so the Ammakin Network is trying to support the placemaking campaign for all of the Arab world, highlighting the resources, the tools, the leaders that are there, the projects that are there. We launched this at the World Urban Forum with UN Habitat. Go ahead. You can go through just a couple of seconds on each slide. Here's the missions to work with the community to transform public spaces into safe places. The fields of activities is all on the Ammakin Placemaking website and through their social media. So I encourage you to follow and get engaged there and look. Here's their history and how they're collaborating with other networks globally. Go ahead. And the different projects that they're taking on, the challenges and opportunities that they're seeing in the region specifically. So yeah, connect with them they have weekly coffees with speakers highlighting local leaders and projects, and we keep promoting and collaborating with them from Placemaking X as much as we can. They did a great event on Beirut, looking at after the explosion there, looking at how placemaking can facilitate the recovery from that crisis. But it's a similar recovery process from the pandemic. Here's the coffee talks. And how they're collaborating with UN Habitat on various efforts as well on their public space program. Some of the upcoming activities and their future projects, looks like they're doing something in Riyadh, Beirut, and Khartoum. They have a competition going on and a place story project. So connect with them on those. So we can wrap up here. This is just placemaking times the MENA region can have global impact. We need everyone to participate, to tell your stories, to network it. You're all part of something bigger. And love to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ethan, for this 360 degrees panoramic view of dealing with public space around the world. I think we have more questions than we could actually cover. I have some of my own. Audience does as well. But I'll start with one of the audience questions since we are talking about the pandemic. The question is, are public places going to be the same after this pandemic? And what are the changes that are required for these places to be live again?
Yeah, so, obviously the pandemic is going to have lingering effects on safety. I think we've all missed public spaces, but we've also developed habits of being apart from them. So we have to invite people back into our public spaces. We have to be proactive, and that's something we've always had to do. We have to program our public spaces to invite people into them. And I think the communities that do that the best, as we open up, as the pandemic declines, will be the communities that succeed the most. and how we do that in new creative ways, how we allow people to be in streets, to fall back in love, to engage people in the process of placemaking. That's people are thinking about where they can move now, where maybe remote work is more possible. So downtowns, rural areas all have the potential to compete, to attract talent, to attract, keep existing people. And the way to do that is through engaging them in shaping their public spaces and making those spaces welcoming and lovable as well.
Thank you very much. There is a more closer to home question here. From your own experience in Saudi Arabia, what are the changes required to create good public spaces?
So there's, globally, a lot of the same mistakes are being made around public spaces. We often over-design them in that they're too rigid. They can't be changed and be flexible over time. We should design spaces to be managed, to be governed, to evolve and change over time. We say it takes many different disciplines to create a place. It takes the skills of more than any one discipline, and we really need to. Make sure we need to recenter the placement conversation in communities, and have them draw on and demand the skills of the disciplines, but not let any one discipline dominate the process or the space. Many more obviously, but yeah, go ahead. We'll get to the next. Oops, I lost you.
You know?
Yeah, there. Yeah.
Sure. Our audience for this talk is made up of a wide spectrum of practitioners, students, and policymakers as well. What's your message for each?
Well, yes, placemaking requires every sector, and if any one sector dominates it, it limits it to an extent. Certainly students are the future of this, and we're really energized by the way that increasingly schools and students are focused on placemaking more holistically than just the typical disciplines that have been supported in academia. But I challenge students also in academia to really get learning, in practice too. I think a lot of the best learning occurs working in a community, having to facilitate their vision, and then draw on the many disciplines that are needed to create good public spaces. Frankly, the real estate sector often looks at things holistically, but obviously sometimes from too much of a profit perspective. So how we create models of collaboration and governance that draw on the different sectors is always really crucial. Each one can always look at the goal of creating places as a way to ground their goals, but enable support and collaboration from the other sectors as well.
Here's a question from the other side of the fence. So it's a bit of a challenge probably.
Please.
Is placemaking just another buzzword for good urban design?
No, thank you. So it is in some ways becoming a bit of a buzzword, and we've been using it though since the 90s, and we see it as an ongoing question. It's not a solution. It's not meant to be a trendy solution. But frankly, it was also set up to really challenge urban design, as urban design was a more holistic approach to public spaces that drew on landscape architecture and planning. But it's at best place sensitive. It's still keeping the solution set within the professions, and often engages communities to get input, but doesn't yet transfer power and build capacity for communities. So placemaking is all about drawing on. We need much more investment in urban design and urban designers involved in placemaking. But ultimately, to do that, we think the best way is to lead with place, lead with the process of shaping placemaking, and the goal of building capacity for communities alone, not just serving the disciplines.
Sure. There is another question from audience. This is it's probably much more grand scale than placemaking, but what are the economic impacts of the pandemic on public places and tourism?
Yeah, so certainly the economic impacts have been, disastrous for so many communities. But how, how placemaking, how we're seeing, as a means to deal with the crisis, and then to come out of it, needs to lead with local businesses, with supporting local businesses first, because most of their money stays in the community, because they best define and support local culture and identity. They can be most responsive often, and they often drive employment faster, job growth faster than some of the bigger businesses or more internet global chains or corporations in our cities. So and tourism, of course, people don't go to cities because they have the same chains and corporations as every other city. There's some they don't stay there and continue to invest. And then of course we got we have to get corporations and chains to adapt their models more to the more place-led model. Some of them are still just trying to suck value from footfall from downtowns, but some of them are adapting even as well. So they can help be part of a recovery that's more place-led, that's more respectful and responsive to local culture and local economies.
Am I on mute? Can you hear me?
You're good.
Okay. From the examples that you shared with us, most of those spaces were already, good public spaces. They had the ingredients of a very good public space anyway. Minus, of course, the pandemic. But what would be the process of placemaking if actually, a city or a public space or is not a place yet, or is not really a good public space?
So yeah, I mean, there's a lot to that. I mean, frankly, a lot of those spaces were, most of these spaces I showed were either dominated by traffic before, or downtown Detroit had almost no life and was bankrupt. So these were problematic spaces and had a lot of safety issues. But how, and then how you apply this also, I think you're asking in spaces that are not yet developed or in greenfield sites. And we have had the challenge in the Middle East a lot to apply placemaking to large scale new developments, to really turn upside down master plans, to lead with the public spaces and the program of them, to shape and inform the massing, the design, the configurations of the plans. Again, leading the Power of 10 can be a model to apply that to a whole new district, to a district that has no life, activating some key places that are visible first, experimenting with those programs, and having that inform any further investment in design development is often a very good strategy. And can, especially as we come out of this, we can't fix everything. Let's find a handful of places to really activate, experiment, create this learning and capacity building for placemaking in a city, and then have that spread out to other spaces in need. We need to, show examples. We often need to start at the centers of cities to get engagement, but you need to show how placemaking can apply in the lowest income parts of a community and in fancy areas, in commercial, residential districts, and so forth.
Thank you so much, Ethan. Thank you for sharing your experience with us, and we are very delighted to have you speak to us today, and hopefully we'll see you very soon here in Riyadh, and we'll walk you through, our public spaces and see what we can do about them. Any final message before we close?
Yeah, well, thank you so much for hosting this and sharing this, and we look forward to building on the conversation and supporting the placemaking campaign that you all have been leading in Riyadh, and how you guys are a learning hub for Riyadh, for Saudi Arabia, and for the region and globally. I think you have been looked at as a leader in urban development, and how especially these focuses on governance and placemaking can be a way that you can lead the region and set an example globally. So we appreciate your
في الختام أيها الأخوة والأخوات، باسم مركز الإدارة المحلية بجامعة الأمير سلطان، يسرنا أن نتقدم لكم بالشكر والتقدير على مشاركتكم وتفاعلكم وحضوركم الحقيقي لهذه المحاضرة القيمة. كما لا يفوتنا في الحقيقة أن نشكر سعادة الدكتور عاطف الشهري على هذه الإدارة لهذه الجلسة وحسن إدارته وتنظيمه لهذه الجلسة. وحقيقة لا يفوتنا في هذا الإطار أن نشكر سعادة الأستاذ إيثان كنت على هذه المحاضرة القيمة والمفيدة والتي الحقيقة فيها معلومات كثيرة، ويمكن الوقت ليس بكافي لعرض كل ما لديه من معلومات قيمة وثرية. شكرا لكم جميعا، وإن شاء الله تكون هذه بداية لمجموعة وسلسلة من المحاضرات اللي سوف نقدمها في المستقبل بمركز الإدارة المحلية. Mr. Ethan, thank you very much. It's very thoughtful and very useful information. I think we need really to benefit from these thoughtful thinking in our places in the kingdom, and I think the group and the forum that you are forming can be a good platform that can be used and attract a group that can be later on develop and work on developing public places and make it more livable, more sustainable, and more economically dominant and staying for the long term and to attract and support the economy. Thank you very much, Mr. Ethan.